I want to tell you about the moment I opened a door and found my entire future standing on the other side of it. Not metaphorically, literally a door. An old farmhouse door with peeling green paint and a handle that required a specific upward lift and a slight rightward push to open. A combination I would learn only because the man on the other side of it would teach me. That man was not supposed to be there. I had bought the house. I had the deed. I had the inspection report, which was 4 pages of things that needed attention and 1 sentence at the bottom that said structurally sound, which I had treated as sufficient endorsement for spending every dollar I had saved in 8 years of working in San Francisco's tech industry. The house was supposed to be empty. It was not empty. And the man inside it, the man who looked at me from across the dim front room with the specific expression of someone caught in a situation they had not planned for but were too honest to run from, would become, over the following months, the most significant person in my life. This is that story. I tell it because I know how many people are living inside something smaller than they are, inside a version of their life that fits the way a coat that belonged to someone else fits, functional, sufficient, but never quite right. I was that person. I had been that person for years, and it took an abandoned farmhouse in rural Vermont and a stranger who had no legal right to be there to show me the shape of the life I had actually been looking for. My name is Sebastian Cole. I was 31 years old when I bought the farmhouse. I had never renovated anything. I had never lived in a rural area. I did not know the first thing about well water or septic systems or the specific personality of a Vermont winter. I knew even less about falling in love. This is what I learned. The honest answer to why I bought an abandoned farmhouse in Vermont when I was a 31-year-old software product manager living in San Francisco is the same answer that drives most significant life decisions. I was not happy. Not dramatically unhappy, not in crisis, not in the kind of pain that announces itself and demands attention. The quieter kind, the kind that lives in Sunday evenings, in the moment after a successful work presentation when you feel nothing, in the gap between what your life looks like from the outside and what it feels like from the inside. I had been in San Francisco for 8 years. I had a good apartment in the Mission District, a salary that would have astonished my younger self, and a social life that was full in the quantitative sense, events attended, connections maintained, the entire architecture of a well-populated existence. I was also, underneath all of it, profoundly lonely. Not for lack of people, for lack of the right kind of connection, the kind that required being fully known rather than strategically presented, the kind that could not be maintained through clever conversation and surface charm, the kind I realized during a long, honest weekend in November 2 years earlier, systematically avoiding since I was 22 years old. Since the relationship that had ended badly enough to make me decide that the risk of really loving someone was not one I was prepared to keep taking. I had been single for 6 years, by choice, justified by the convenient business of a demanding career and a full calendar. The farmhouse appeared on a real estate listing website in March. I had been searching for what I could not have told you precisely, but searching with the vague framework of somewhere different, somewhere that required building something, somewhere that might force a version of myself I had been postponing. The listing had 7 photographs. The exterior, which showed a white clapboard farmhouse with a sagging porch and a barn in the background, framed by maple trees that in March were bare and reaching. The interior, which showed high ceilings with original plaster and wide plank pine floors and windows that would be extraordinary in the right light. A kitchen that needed everything, 2 bathrooms that needed more. And a price that, for Vermont land and a structurally sound house, was remarkable. I called the listing agent that same evening. I flew to Vermont the following weekend. I stood in the driveway on a gray March morning and looked at the house and felt something I had not felt in years. Not excitement exactly, something quieter, recognition. Like the feeling of remembering something you did not know you had forgotten. I made an offer on the way to the airport. It was accepted before my plane landed in San Francisco. I gave notice at my job 3 weeks later. I had savings. I had a plan, loose, optimistic, insufficiently detailed, but a plan. Renovate the farmhouse, figure out remote consulting work, learn to live somewhere that required actual presence rather than performed presence. I did not tell anyone the full truth of why I was going. I said it was an adventure, a career transition, a long overdue change of scene. What it was, actually, was an attempt to find the version of myself that had gotten lost somewhere in 8 years of carefully managed surface living. I drove to Vermont in late May with my car packed and a notebook full of renovation priorities and no idea, genuinely no idea, that the house had a current occupant. The drive from the nearest town took 20 minutes on a 2-lane road that became a gravel road that became, in the last quarter mile, something that the word road was being generous about. I parked in the overgrown gravel area beside the barn and sat in my car for a moment. The property was more than the photographs had communicated. 7 acres of mixed meadow and wood, the meadow gone wild with the particular ambition of land that has not been managed in years. The barn was larger than it appeared in the listing, its red paint faded to a warm rose. The maple trees that had been bare in March were fully leafed now, casting the kind of shade that makes a hot day feel like a gift. And the house? The house was beautiful in the way that old things are beautiful, not perfect, not restored, but bone-deep beautiful. The kind of beautiful that speaks to the people who built it and the people who lived in it and the particular weight of time accumulated in a place where human beings have tried to make a life. I got out of the car. I stood in the late afternoon light and I felt, for the first time in a long time, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I got my key from the lockbox the agent had left on the porch railing. I lifted the handle slightly right, pushed slightly up, and the door, the green door with the peeling paint, swung inward. I stepped into the front room. The smell of old wood and something else, something that was not decay, something that was warm, recent. I stopped. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, rolled neatly beside the wall but present, unmistakably present. A small camp stove on the kitchen counter, a stack of books, actual physical books, 4 or 5 of them beside the sleeping bag, a pair of work boots near the door that I had not noticed when I came in. I stood very still. The house was not empty. I heard a sound from the back of the house, footsteps on the back staircase, unhurried, the footsteps of someone who did not yet know they had company. And then the door at the back of the kitchen opened, and he stepped through, and we looked at each other across the front room of my farmhouse, and 4 seconds passed in which neither of us moved or spoke, and the late May light came through the unwashed windows and landed between us like something deliberate. He was perhaps 30, tall, with dark auburn hair that needed cutting and several days of beard, and the kind of physical build that comes from actual outdoor work rather than a gym. He was wearing a worn flannel shirt with the sleeves pushed up and jeans that had genuine dirt on them rather than manufactured distressing. His eyes, which were the specific gray-green of lichen on old stone, were looking at me with an expression that was, and this surprised me, not panic. Steady, honest, already prepared to explain. "You must be the new owner," he said. His voice was low and even, a Vermont voice, the specific cadence of a place. "I am," I said. A pause. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said. "Noah Calloway." He told me within the first 5 minutes, which suggested he had decided, in the moment of our meeting, that honesty was the only available strategy. He was 32 years old. He had grown up on the farm adjacent to this one, the Calloway farm, now his older sister's operation, 2 fields over through the wood. He had known this farmhouse his entire life, had played in its barn as a child, had helped its previous owner, an elderly man named Harold Fitch, with maintenance and firewood for the last years of Harold's life. Harold had died 14 months ago. The estate had taken time to settle. In the gap between Harold's death and the property's sale, Noah had been using the farmhouse. Not vandalism, not carelessness. He had kept it clean. He had made minor repairs, a window that had been broken, a section of porch railing that had rotted, the water heater element that had failed. He had treated it with the respect of someone who understood what it was. He told me this, standing in the kitchen, with the late afternoon light on his face, and the complete directness of a person who has decided that the truth is preferable to any alternative. "I'll be gone by tomorrow morning," he said. "I'm sorry for the intrusion." He meant it. The apology was genuine and without performance. I looked at him, at the kitchen he had clearly maintained with care, at the window he had repaired, which I could see now that I looked, a newer pane set into the old frame with evident skill, at the man himself, who was preparing to disappear with the same quiet dignity he had apparently inhabited the space with. Something in me, the part that had spent 8 years in San Francisco performing its way through a carefully constructed life, recognized something in him. Another person living in a smaller space than they were. I did not know that yet, of course. I learned it later, in the months that followed. But I felt the edge of it, in the kitchen, in the first 5 minutes. "You don't have to leave tonight," I said. He looked at me steadily. "I don't have any claim here." "I know," I said. "I'm not saying you do. I'm saying," I looked at the camp stove, at the sleeping bag, at the stack of books. "I'm saying it's late, and I just drove 11 hours, and I don't actually have anywhere for either of us to sleep yet because the furniture situation is arriving Thursday." A pause. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, the precondition for one. "You drove 11 hours, he said. "From Manhattan, where I stopped overnight. Before that, San Francisco." He looked at me with the gray-green eyes. "You bought a farmhouse in Vermont from San Francisco." "Yes." "Have you ever been to Vermont before?" "Once," I said, "to look at this house." "A bit." "In March," I said, "so I saw it under ideal conditions." And Noah Calloway, who was squatting in my farmhouse and had no legal right to be standing in my kitchen, looked at me and smiled. Slowly, the smile arriving the way the important things arrive, not all at once, but progressively, each stage more complete than the last. It was, I would think later, the first real smile I had seen directed at me in longer than I could calculate. Not a social smile, not a strategic one, the kind that arrives because something is genuinely, irresistibly funny. "March," he said. "You bought a Vermont farmhouse in March." The photos were very convincing. "The photos were taken in September," he said, "by someone who understood angles." I looked at him, at the smile, at the kitchen full of evening light and the evidence of someone who had cared for a place that did not belong to him. "Stay tonight," I said. "I'll figure out dinner." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a general store in town that stays open until 8, he said. "I know what they have." "Do you have a car?" "Truck," he said, "out back." "Show me where the store is," I said, "and tell me what I need to know about this house." He looked at me for another moment, the assessment of a careful person. Then he picked up his truck keys from the counter. "You'll need to know a lot," he said. "I have time," I said. We drove to the general store in his truck with the windows down and the Vermont evening coming in warm and green and full of the smell of things growing, and he told me about the house the way you tell someone about a person you love, with detail, with attention, with the specific tenderness of someone describing something they cannot keep. And I listened. And somewhere between the water heater's quirks and the history of the back field and the names of the maple trees he had known since childhood, I stopped thinking about the house. I started thinking about him. He left the next morning. Not far, 2 fields and a wood to his sister's farm. But he left, because the sleeping bag in the front room was his, and the farmhouse was mine, and the arrangement of the previous 14 months was over. I watched his truck go down the gravel drive, and I stood in the kitchen with my coffee, made on his camp stove, which he had left because he said I could use it until Thursday, and I looked at the space he had occupied and felt the specific quality of a house that has recently had someone in it. Different from empty. Not empty. He came back at 9 in the morning. I had not expected this. I was standing in the barn trying to understand what I was looking at in terms of infrastructure when I heard the truck, and he appeared in the barn doorway with 2 coffees from the general store and a list on a piece of paper. I made a repair priority list, he said. Based on what I know about the house, you can ignore it if you want. I took the coffee, I took the list. It was detailed, specific, written in the handwriting of someone who thought in systems, the well pump, which was original and needed evaluation, the furnace, which was functional but old, the kitchen ceiling, where a past leak had left a soft spot in the plaster that would worsen before winter, the barn roof, 3 sections of which had lost shingles. He had been paying attention to this house for 14 months. He had been tending it in the way that people tend things they love, with practical care rather than sentiment. This is thorough, I said. Harold kept notes on everything, he said. I found them in the kitchen drawer. I've been updating them. I looked up from the list. You've been maintaining records. It seemed right, he said simply. I looked at him in the barn doorway with his coffee and his work shirt, and his complete lack of self-consciousness about the fact that he had shown more care for this property than most owners would. I need help, I said, with the renovation. I know what needs to be done in general terms, but I don't know how to do most of it, and I can't afford to hire everything out. He looked at me steadily. I know this house, he said. I know you do. And this land, he said. I know where the drainage problems are. I know which trees are coming down eventually. I know the well. I can pay you, I said. Not a lot. I'm working with a tight budget, but something. He was quiet for a moment. The assessment again, the careful consideration of a person who does not make decisions impulsively. I have time in the mornings, he said. My sister's operation runs afternoons mostly. I could help with the structural things, the things that need doing before winter. Winter, I said. Right, that's a thing here. The precondition for the smile again. That is significantly a thing here. Tell me about winter, I said. And he did. June and July. The furniture arrived Thursday. Noah helped me carry it in without being asked, appearing at 7 in the morning with the matter-of-fact readiness of someone for whom physical labor is simply what the morning requires. He did not linger. He helped, efficiently and without commentary on my choices, and when the truck left, he went to the kitchen ceiling and began the process of addressing the soft spot in the plaster with the focused attention he gave everything. This became the pattern. He arrived most mornings before 8. He worked on the house with a competence that I found, progressively, to be extraordinary, not the broad competence of someone who had learned a little about everything. The deep competence of someone who had grown up in houses like this one, who understood their systems and their personalities, who could diagnose a problem by sound or smell or the specific quality of a door that did not hang quite right. He taught me as we worked. This was the part I had not expected, the teaching. He did not do things for me, he showed me how. There was a difference I discovered that mattered enormously. He showed me how to tape and mud plaster, how to identify which shingles were structural failures versus cosmetic ones, how to read the well's pressure gauge and what the numbers meant, how to split firewood with the specific efficiency that made the task feel elegant rather than brutal. He was patient in the way that people who have learned things from other patient people are patient. From his grandfather, he mentioned once, who had taught him most of what he knew about building and land and the particular responsibility of caring for things that outlast you. I learned things about the house, about Vermont, about what it meant to build something with your hands rather than manage something with your mind. I also learned things about Noah. Slowly, because he was not a person who offered himself quickly, not closed, never cold or withholding, but measured. The information about himself arrived in the way that his smile arrived, progressively, each piece more significant than the one before. He had left Vermont at 23, gone to Boston, architecture school, 2 years of it, before his father's health declined, and he came back to help his sister run the farm. He had intended to go back to school. That had been 7 years ago. He did not say this with bitterness. He said it with the specific acceptance of a person who has made peace with a life that diverged from the planned one and found something worth having in the divergence. But I heard, underneath the acceptance, the outline of something set aside, a version of himself that had been postponed. I knew something about postponed versions. In July, he brought me to his sister's farm for dinner. Her name was Claire. She was 36, practical and warm, with her brother's grey-green eyes and a directness that was characteristically Vermont and characteristically Callaway. She fed me pot roast and asked me 17 questions about San Francisco and my plans for the farmhouse with the efficiency of someone running a rapid assessment. At the end of dinner, she looked at me and said, "Noah's been happier this summer." I looked at him across the table. He was looking at his plate. "He fixed my kitchen ceiling," I said. "He's earned some satisfaction." Claire looked between us with the expression of an older sister who sees things her brother does not yet acknowledge. "Sure," she said pleasantly, "that's probably it." It was a Thursday in August. We had been working on the barn roof all day, a physical and complicated task that involved more height than I was comfortable with and more heat than Vermont should legally produce in August. By evening, we were both exhausted and covered in the specific dust that old barns generate, and we had achieved, between us, the particular closeness of people who have spent a day in physical difficulty together. We were on the porch with cold water and the evening light doing its Vermont thing, which involved turning everything gold and making the meadow look like a painting of itself, when Noah said something that surprised me. "Why did you really leave San Francisco?" I looked at him. He was looking at the meadow, not pressing, not pushing, asking with the genuine curiosity of someone who has been watching and has noticed that the answer he has been given does not fully account for the evidence. "I told you," I said, "change of scene, career transition." "You told me a version," he said, still looking at the meadow. "It's a good version, it covers the question, but it's not the whole thing." I was quiet. This was the test. I recognized it as a test, not because he was administering one deliberately, but because honesty always is. The moment when someone sees past the version you offer, and you must decide whether to retreat to the version or step past it. "I was lonely," I said. "In the middle of a very full life, I was genuinely, consistently lonely, and I had been for years. And I bought the house because I thought, I don't know what I thought, that a change of place would produce a change of self, that building something physical would address something that felt hollow." He was quiet, looking at the meadow. "Did it?" he asked. "It's addressed something," I said carefully. He turned and looked at me then, the grey-green eyes in the evening light, the directness of a person asking a question they already suspect the answer to. "Sebastian," he said. My name in his voice. I had heard him say it all summer in the practical context of work, as direction, as information. This was different. This was address. "Yeah," I said. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to know before I say it that if it changes things, the arrangement, the work, any of it, I understand, and I won't make it complicated." My heart was doing something in my chest. "Tell me," I said. He looked at the meadow again, a breath. "I've been out since I was 24, he said. "I came out in Boston. It's not," he paused. "It's not a secret. Claire knows, most people who know me know," a pause. "I don't know if you know, and I realized recently that I wanted you to know, because he stopped. "Because," I said softly. "Because I think about you," he said, simply, with the complete honesty of someone who has decided that simplicity is the only option, more than is strictly explained by the work, and I wanted you to know that, and to know what it means in terms of who I am." The evening light on the meadow, the barn we had been roofing all day behind us. The house that had been his before it was mine and had somehow, over a summer, become something that belonged to both of us in a way that had nothing to do with deeds or legal titles. Noah, I said. Yeah. I've been out since I was 22, a pause, and I haven't been honest about the whole reason I left San Francisco. The career transition and the change of scene are real, but the thing underneath them, I looked at him. I haven't let myself really be with anyone in 6 years. I convinced myself it was a choice, that I was protecting myself from something, but mostly I was just, the word came, afraid. He looked at me. Of what? Of being known, I said, of letting someone close enough to see the whole thing and finding out that the whole thing isn't, I stopped, that it isn't enough. He was very still. Sebastian, he said, very quietly. Yeah, that is the most unnecessary fear I have ever heard. I looked at him. He was looking at me with the grey-green eyes in the last of the evening light, and his expression was open in the way that faces are open when someone has stopped managing them, when they are simply present. Why, I said. Because, he said, I've been watching you all summer, learn things you didn't know, fix things you'd never fixed, ask questions without ego and accept answers without defensiveness, take care of a house that was falling apart with the same attention you'd give something perfect. He paused. The whole thing, Sebastian, I've been watching the whole thing, and it's... He stopped. Enough, I asked. Maury then, he said. The porch, the evening light, the meadow going gold. I reached over and I put my hand on his, and he turned his hand over and held mine, and we sat there on the porch of the farmhouse with the summer evening around us, and neither of us said anything, and the silence was the kind that is not empty but absolutely full. He turned his head and looked at me. Hi, he said. Hi, I said. And we were laughing, both of us, at the simplicity of it, at the fact that the most significant moment of a summer had arrived with the most ordinary word. We stayed on the porch until the stars appeared. And when I went inside, and he drove down the gravel road back to Claire's farm, I stood in the kitchen of my farmhouse, which had been his before it was mine, which had always somehow been going to belong to both of us, and I felt the specific quality of a life that has just become more real. Maury itself. Maury like the thing it was always trying to be. He came back the next morning at 7:58, not 8, 7:58, 2 minutes early, and I had been watching the gravel drive since 7:45, and I knew what that meant, and so did he, and neither of us said anything about it at all. We just went to work on the barn like it was an ordinary morning, except it was the least ordinary morning of either of our lives, and we both knew that too. September in Vermont is an argument for the existence of beauty as a fundamental force. The maples turned, first the edges of the leaves, then the whole of them, and then the whole hillside, and then the entire world visible from the farmhouse porch was on fire in the specific and magnificent way that New England autumn produces and that no photograph has ever fully captured. I had been told about Vermont fall, I had seen the photographs, I was not prepared. Noah watched me stand on the porch on the first fully turned morning of the season, looking at the hillside with the expression he later described as someone seeing a thing they had wanted all their life without knowing they were wanting it. You can say it, he said. I can't, I said. I don't have the vocabulary for it. Nobody does, he said. That's kind of the point. We had been together was the word, in the understated Vermont way that Noah used words, since the August evening on the porch. Not dramatically, not with announcement, with the quiet accumulation of evenings that extended past work hours. Of dinners that moved from his sister's farm to my kitchen as I learned, slowly and with his guidance, to cook in a real kitchen with produce from the farm stand in town. Of the specific learning of another person, the detailed, patient, wonderful process of discovering how someone moves through their life, what they find funny, what they find difficult, what they are proud of, and what they are still working through. Noah found it difficult to talk about the architectural career he had set aside. He was proud of his knowledge of the land in a way that was genuine and not defensive. He was working through, I came to understand, the specific grief of a person who had built a life around obligation and care for others, and was only beginning to ask what he might build if the primary question were himself. I recognized this because I had been asking a version of the same question. We recognized each other in it. Not perfectly, we were different people with different histories and different ways of carrying things, but enough, in the fundamental place where the question lived. One evening in September, after dinner, he was looking at the architectural drawings I had pinned to the kitchen wall, my plans for the renovation's second phase, which included the barn conversion I had been thinking about. He was looking at them with the specific quality of attention that meant something was happening in his mind beyond simple observation. "These proportions are off," he said, gently, technically. "I know," I said. "I can't figure out how to fix them." He picked up a pencil. He looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he began to sketch lightly on the edge of the paper. The sketch that emerged in 5 minutes was what I had been trying to get to for 3 weeks. The proportions corrected, the space rationalized, the thing that had been conceptually right but technically wrong becoming right in both ways. He put the pencil down. He looked at what he had drawn. I watched his face. Watching someone rediscover something they had set aside is an intimate thing. The quality of recognition in his expression, the evidence that the skill had not gone anywhere, had simply been waiting, was one of the most moving things I had seen. "Noah," I said. "It's just basic spatial reasoning," he said. "It's not," I said, "and you know it's not." He was quiet. "Have you thought about going back to school?" I asked, carefully, "to finish the degree?" A long pause. "It's been 7 years," he said. "7 years isn't a reason," I said. "It's a number." He looked at the sketch. "Claire's operation." "Claire's operation," I said, "is doing fine. I've had dinner there 6 times. Claire is one of the most capable people I've ever met." A pause. "She told me last week that she's been waiting for you to stop using the farm as an excuse." He looked at me, something shifting in his face. "She said that." "She said it, and then she said that if I had any sense, I'd be telling you the same thing. So here I am, telling you the same thing." He looked at the sketch for a long time. Then, very quietly, "I think about it." "I know you do." "It feels," he stopped, "it feels like starting something I can't finish, like wanting something I don't have a right to want anymore." I crossed the kitchen and stood beside him at the drawing on the wall, the barn conversion, the thing that had been wrong and that he had made right in 5 minutes. "You made that look easy," I said. "It is easy," he said, "for me." "That's not nothing," I said. "That's the whole thing. The things that are easy for you that are hard for everyone else. That's not ordinary. That's what you were supposed to do with." He looked at me. "You came here to build a house," he said. "I came here to build a life," I said. The house was the excuse. Something in his face opened. "Sebastian." "I'm not telling you what to do," I said. "I'm telling you what I see, because you spent a summer telling me what you saw in me and it changed things. And this is me doing the same thing back." He looked at the sketch, then at me, then at the whole kitchen, which over the summer had been transformed from the wreck I had found in May into something that functioned and breathed and felt like the center of a real life. "I'll look into programs," he said, quietly, like a decision being made. "In Burlington, there's a program in Burlington." "I know," I said. "I looked it up." He turned his head and stared at me. "You looked it up," he said. "Last week," I said, "after Claire told me what she told me." "You and my sister," he said, "against me." "For you," I said, "significant difference." October brought the first frost. It also brought a conversation that needed to happen and that we had both been circling with the careful avoidance of people who know something important needs to be said. and are not quite ready to say it. The question of what this was, what we were building, what the farmhouse meant in terms of a future rather than a summer. I had not planned to stay in Vermont permanently, or I had planned it vaguely in the way that people plan things when they are avoiding the specificity that makes planning real. The farmhouse was mine. The renovation was underway, but the future beyond that had been deliberately unexamined. Because examining, it meant asking where Noah fit in it, and asking that meant being vulnerable in a way that I had spent 6 years carefully not being. He brought it up on a Sunday morning. We were in the kitchen, the maple outside the window at peak color, the light coming in amber and extraordinary. He was at the stove, and I was at the table with coffee, and we were in the specific comfortable quiet of two people who have learned each other's mornings. He turned around with 2 plates, and he looked at me across the kitchen, and he said, "What happens in January?" I looked at him. "January," he said, "is when the renovation's first phase will be done, and you haven't said what comes after, whether you're staying, whether this," he set the plates on the table, he sat down, "whether this is a Vermont chapter or a life." The directness, always, the Vermont directness of a man who had decided, at some point, that the truth was the only available currency. "I want it to be a life," I said, without hesitation, the lack of hesitation surprising me. "I want to stay. I want the house and the land and the everything that's happened here this summer." I looked at him. "I want you." He looked at me steadily. "That's clear," he said. "Is it what you want?" I asked. "Because that's the part I don't know, that's the part I've been." "Yes," he said, simply, before I finished the sentence. A breath. "Yes," I said. "Yes," he said. "Sebastian, yes. I want to finish what I started in Boston, the degree. I want to do the work that the sketch last month reminded me I was supposed to be doing. I want to help you build this place into what it should be. I want," he stopped, the careful man allowing himself to be uncalibrated for one moment. "I want mornings like this one. I want to stop being a person who lives next door to his own life." I looked at him across the breakfast table. In the kitchen, with the maple light and the 2 plates, and the particular ordinary, extraordinary quality of a morning that is exactly what a morning should be. "You're not next door to it," I said. "You're in it. You've been in it since May." "Since before May," he said quietly. "Since Harold. Since I used to sit in this kitchen and think about what this house could be." "And what is it?" I asked. He looked around the kitchen. At the ceiling he had repaired, and the window he had replaced, and the walls that we had worked on together through the summer. At the farmhouse that had been abandoned and was no longer abandoned, and was becoming, steadily and with great care, something that people had lived in and loved in and would live in and love in again. "Home," he said. The renovation's first phase completed on January 14th. The farmhouse was warm for the first time in years. The furnace worked. The plaster was whole. The kitchen functioned. The wide plank pine floors, cleaned and finished over a November weekend that involved more effort and more laughter than any single task before it, glowed in the light from the new fixtures. Noah enrolled in the Burlington Architecture program for the spring semester. He told Claire at dinner on a Friday in December. She put down her fork. She looked at him. She looked at me across the table. She picked her fork back up. "Finally," she said, and went back to eating. That was it. That was Claire's entire response. Efficient, characteristic, sufficient. Noah looked at her. "That's all you have to say." "What else is there?" she said. "You should have done it 4 years ago. You're doing it now. Eat your food." He looked at me. I looked at my food and said nothing, and felt the specific happiness of someone watching a good thing happen to a person they love. Spring enrollment, Burlington, 2 days a week, the farmhouse as base, the remaining renovation work on the weekends. Claire's farm, which she had never actually needed him to run and had always been, as she confirmed cheerfully, perfectly capable of managing alone. And the barns. The barn conversion had become the project. Noah's design, the corrected version, and then a full redesign, pages and pages of it that accumulated on the kitchen table over winter evenings, was extraordinary, modest and light-filled, and completely right for the land and the existing structure. He designed it with the specific intelligence of someone who had been looking at it for 30 years and knew exactly what it wanted to become. A studio space for his design work for whatever came next. On the evening he finished the final drawings, he spread them on the kitchen table and we looked at them together, and I felt the specific pride of watching someone become more themselves. The architecture that had been set aside for 7 years arriving now, in this kitchen, in this farmhouse, through the specific accident of a man buying an abandoned property and finding it already occupied. "Noah," I said. Thank you." He looked up from the drawings. "For what?" "For being here when I got here," I said. "For staying, for the repair list and the well and the ceiling and the all of it." He looked at me with the grey-green eyes that I had been looking at since May. "Thank you for not making me leave," he said. "I never wanted you to leave," I said. "I just didn't know that yet." He looked at the drawings, at the farmhouse around us, at the life that had accumulated in the space between an abandoned property and two people who were, both of them, in the process of becoming more themselves than they had been before. "This was Harold's house," he said, quietly. "He lived here alone for 30 years after his wife died. He told me once that the hardest thing about being alone was not the absence of company. It was the absence of someone to build things for." He paused. "Someone to show the good light to in the morning." "He sounds like he knew something," I said. "He knew a lot," Noah said. "He also told me, the last winter he was alive, that something good was going to happen to this house." He smiled, the complete smile, the one that arrived progressively and took over his whole face. I thought he meant structurally. I laughed, he laughed. In the farmhouse kitchen in January, with the drawings on the table and the maple outside the window bare and reaching, and the barn waiting to become what it was designed to become. And I thought, this is it. This is the thing I drove 11 hours toward without knowing what I was driving toward. This kitchen, this man, this life that looks like a farmhouse renovation and is actually something else entirely. The thing underneath the thing. The life underneath the life I thought I was building. By April, the barn conversion had begun. Noah managed the construction with the focused competence of someone doing the thing they were born for. He was also, simultaneously, 2 weeks into the Burlington program and arriving home on Tuesday and Thursday evenings with the specific energized exhaustion of someone being professionally fed for the first time in years. He spread his program work on the kitchen table alongside the barn drawings, and they coexisted in the comfortable productive disorder of a shared creative life. I was consulting remotely 3 days a week for a tech company in Boston that had found me through a former colleague. The work was manageable and well paid, and left me 4 days for the house and the land and the particular education of learning to live on a working rural property through its first full year. The maple trees that had been bare when I arrived the previous May were leafing now. The meadow was greening. The kitchen garden that Noah had sketched out in February and that we had built together in March was showing its first growth, herbs and early vegetables, small and green and entirely serious. Claire came for Sunday dinner once a month and ate everything and said very little and looked at both of us with the expression of someone watching a bet pay off. On an evening in late April, Noah came home from Burlington and put his bag down at the door, and he looked around the kitchen, at the drawings, at the consulting work on my laptop, at the kitchen garden visible through the window, at the entire accumulated evidence of a shared life being built, and he had an expression on his face I had not seen before. Complete stillness, the stillness of someone looking at something they cannot quite believe. "What?" I said. He looked at me. "I drove down the road just now," he said, "and the house had lights on, and I thought," he stopped. "What?" I said again, more softly. "I thought someone's home," he said, "and I knew it was you, and I thought," his voice had something in it, the something that arrives when a person allows themselves to feel the full weight of a good thing. "I thought," I've never come home to someone before. I crossed the kitchen. I stood in front of him. You have now, I said. He looked at me with the grey-green eyes in the April kitchen light, the man who had been in the house when I arrived, who had fixed the window and tended the space and built the repair list and stayed, who was building a career and building a barn and rebuilding, alongside me, the specific architecture of a life that had been set aside for too long. I have now, he said. And the farmhouse that had been abandoned was not abandoned. It was, finally, fully, completely, what it had always been built to be. Home.